Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for this week's weekly reader. I hope you're as excited as I am. I am afraid, I've got a lot of things written down. I'm afraid that today's episode is going to sort of get away from me, so we'll have to get right into things. Number one, first and foremost, we're still going through Absalom here on the channel, as well as The Shining, and I have mocked up some nice fancy new thumbnails for the Shining series. I hope to do something in kind for Absalom, but I'm not there yet. I don't know. I don't have anything planned yet. I just want to get more creative with it. But so I mentioned last time that I will be doing 2 pieces of writing on the Patreon for patrons, and sort of setting it out that way. One will certainly be a draft of a poem. The other will be something else. This month it is looking more likely that it will be a second poem. I am choosing from a host of poems to put that second piece up there. What I'm trying to say, roundabout, is that I do have the first piece of the month posted on Patreon. It is a draft of my poem, Mattressmony. If you are a fan of hearing someone get their heart ripped out, if you want to point and laugh at me in all of my pain, it's on Patreon. But you'll have to pay to do it, because if I'm going to be a whore, I'm going to be a whore of principle. I think that is worth it. But what else is going on the channel? First off, second off, maybe. Third off? Is that how far are we into things? I don't know. I've lost track. I do want to start posing the question during this feature on the channel: what are some passages that you've come across lately and found striking? As you know, if you've been on the channel for any period of time, I really like gorgeous passages. I'm a big fan of quotes from pieces. So much so that I have worked them into every review that I've done here on the channel. I have made it from the very first review that happened on Strip Cover Lit. It's been a part of the sort of formula that is used on reviews. So if you've come across anything, I really like hearing those things. You could get at me on social media or just the comment section below, however it is. But the first thing I would like, I want to try to make sure I read a poem every week in here. And this week's poem comes to us from, I know it's going to be a mirrored image, which kind of sucks because I'm stuck on the phone for now. The Best Poems of the English Language from Chaucer through Robert Frost, selected and with commentary from Harold Bloom. This book is going to play a key role in today's episode, but the poem I would like to read comes from William Carlos Williams. On page 852, it is called The Widow's Lament in Springtime. Sorrow is my own yard, where the new grass flames as it has flamed often before, but not with the cold fire that closes round me this year. 35 years I lived with my husband. The plum tree is white today, with masses of flowers. Masses of flowers load the cherry branches, and color sometimes bushes yellow and some red, but the grief in my heart is stronger than they. For though they were my joy formerly, today I notice them and turn away forgetting. Today my son told me that in the meadows, at the edge of the heavy woods, in the distance, he saw trees of white flowers. I feel that I would like to go there and fall into those flowers and sink into the marsh near them. One thing for which I believe William Carlos Williams is always good is to sort of poke and prod out the profundity that lay naked in any given moment of your life. This being a relatively quaint moment that is explicated by Williams in light of A Widow's Lament. And I hope that sort of as we are emerging back into the world from this enclosure that we've been that we've undergone, through which we have been forced, these moments of, for some of us, loneliness, for some of us simply alone, others trapped with people they hate. That's right, I'm looking at you. If you're with your family right now, you're ready to kill everyone, aren't you? I hear you. You can tell me. It's fine. It's fine. Let it all out. Let it all out. Don't do it. But let it out. You know. But I hope that we are able to, as we emerge, reframe things for ourselves. And like I say, just sort of appreciate the profundity that is there in everyday life. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, you know. These little moments, these little images that happen upon us that really do mean so much more than we are willing to take in at that moment. I think that's a large part of poetry. I think that the ability to sort of jab the needle of observation into the arm of life and squeeze out meaning is what poetry is maybe all about. Maybe I'm just being pretentious. It's possible. And if you look at the comment sections of pretty much any video I've ever done here, it's laced through there. My own pretentiousness being called out by people who know I will never see them or meet them. It's fine. I get it. But I think that that's what's there. I think that that profundity is what is inside poetry. And the ability to recognize that is what makes a poet. Also, this week, I've been having some conversations about Shirley Jackson. As I move these books around, you're going to get seasick because I'm on a shitty little desk with a shitty little phone propped up. I have an affinity for Shirley Jackson. I love Shirley Jackson. I can't get enough Shirley Jackson, but there is someone else who is a big Shirley Jackson fan. Somebody else has a massive heart for old Shirley. Who is that? None other than Stephen King himself. Here in Danse Macabre on page 33, he says of Shirley, "Let's talk monsters. Exactly what is a monster? Begin by assuming that the tale of horror, no matter how primitive, is allegorical by its very nature, that it is symbolic. Assume that it is talking to us, like a patient on a psychoanalyst's couch, about one thing while it means another. I am not saying that horror is consciously allegorical or symbolic, that it is to suggest an artfulness that few writers of horror fiction or directors of horror films aspire to. There has recently been a retrospective of AIP movies in New York, 1979, and the idea of a retrospective suggests art, but at most they are trash art. The pictures have great nostalgia value, but those searching for culture may look elsewhere. To suggest that Roger Corman was unconsciously creating art while on a 4-day shooting schedule and a budget of $10,000 is to suggest the absurd. The element of allegory is there only because it is built in, a given, impossible to escape. Horror appeals to us because it says, in a symbolic way, things we would be afraid to say right out straight, with the bark still on. It offers us a chance to exercise That's right, not exercise, like a demon, but exercise, exercise, emotions which society demands we keep closely at hand. The horror film is an invitation to indulge in deviant, antisocial behavior by proxy, to commit gratuitous acts of violence, indulge our puerile dreams of power, to give in to our most craven fears. Perhaps more than anything else, the horror story or horror movie says it's okay to join the mob, to become the total tribal being, to destroy the outsider. It has never been done better or more literally than in Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, where the entire concept of the outsider is symbolic, created by nothing more than a black circle color on a strip of paper. But there is no symbolism in the rain of stones which ends the story. The victim's own child pitches in as the mother dies, screaming, "It's not fair. It's not fair." This is just a hint. I think Shirley Jackson is mentioned 5 or 6 times in this book, Danse Macabre. Also, this theme of allegory and the outsider can be found very explicitly in We Have Always Lived in the Castle. So I started thinking, maybe I should look into allegory a bit more. Maybe this is part of what really interests me. So I have here a dictionary of literary and thematic terms, facts on file, writer's library from Checkmark Books. And I'd like to read the definition of allegory, just to be a prick. Allegory, a type of narrative in which the surface story reflects at least one other meaning. Traditional allegory frequently employs personification, the use of human characters to represent abstract ideas. Medieval morality plays were allegories in which abstractions such as mankind, good deeds, penance, and death appeared as characters. Another type of allegory uses the surface story to refer to historical or political events and persons. Jonathan Swift's Tale of a Tub, 1704, for example, provides a satirical allegory of the Reformation. In his Anatomy of Criticism, 1957, Northrop Frye distinguishes between a continuous allegory, such as The Fairy Queen, 1590 to 1596, which maintains the allegorical meaning throughout the narrative, and intermittent allegory, such as intermittent allegory, such as The Scarlet Letter, 1850, where it may be picked up and dropped at pleasure. By the 19th century, allegorical critique had begun to fall from favor. Symbolism, another method of representing an alternative meaning, became the preferred form. Symbolism and allegory sometimes overlap, but there is an important distinction between the two. A symbol bears a natural relation to the events of the story. The whale in Herman Melville's Moby Dick, 1851, is both a whale and a mysterious force. In allegory, the surface story is often an arbitrary excuse for the secondary meaning. As a result, in the age of modernism, symbolism came to be preferred to the seemingly antiquated technique of allegory. More recently, allegory has made a comeback in theory, if not practice. Deconstruction argues that the arbitrary quality of the allegory is an accurate reflection of the character of language itself. The character of language itself. I think we're going to get back to that. That is, deconstructionists see the idea of a natural relation between the word and the object to which it refers as a comforting illusion. For them, the reality is closer to that depicted in an allegory. An additional use of the term is as the second of 4 levels of meaning in medieval exegesis of biblical and literary texts. Now, I think that an allegory is an accurate reflection of the character of language itself. I think that is sometimes, surely, the case. Sometimes it is wrong. Sometimes it is merely a dimension of what is going on. I think that more often than not, the allegory can be pinned directly onto the characters. Not the character of language, but the language of the characters. What does the character who's speaking think is going on? And there is a great schism between art and propaganda. And allegory is this wonderful little playground between the two where it can be seen either way. But if someone is, look, as a bit of a contrarian and a shit stirrer myself, I love allegory because of that gray area. You can say something so devastatingly true through allegory, and the minute someone calls you out for it, I didn't say that. That's not what's in the story. That's your own prejudice come to play. And it is a wonderful trick for turning the asshole back on his or herself. It is a miraculous tool that keeps the social justice warrior type at bay. It is a miraculous tool that keeps the zealot at bay. And it is a miraculous tool with which a zealot can be called out as a zealot. It is so allegory is used to distance what may be a triggerable event, a triggerable theme, a triggerable subject, and take it out of that triggerable circumstance. Once that is done, and these meaningful truths can be slipped in, an individual only needs to be able to transverse back and forth between the allegory at play and the truth underneath. This is what makes allegories so damned compelling. This is what makes allegories so damning. This is what makes allegories so incredibly useful, but still not propagandistic, because the artist must divorce his or herself from the piece. The artist is allowed to squeeze whatever meaning he or she means out of the piece, but once it's out there, it's no longer yours. Whatever it is that a reader will take away from it is what that reader will take away from it. So it might be possible to read something as awful as Mein Kampf as allegory and laugh at the stupidity therein, right? It is possible to do that because why? That book doesn't belong to the author anymore. Fuck the author. No book, no short story, no poem belongs to the author anymore. Fuck the author. And because of this, something written as allegory, explicitly as allegory, will strike so many different readers in so many different ways. And I would like to give an example of what I believe is allegory. And it comes to us from, again, I know that this is going to be a mirror image, the Scribner Anthology of Contemporary Short Fiction, revised and updated 2nd edition. This comes to us from page 19, if I can get there. And I went too far, damn it. We'll read the first little bit of The School by Donald Bartholomew. Well, we had all these children out planting trees, see, because we figured that that was part of their education, to see how, the root systems And also the sense of responsibility, taking care of things, being individually responsible. You know what I mean? And the trees all died. They were orange trees. I don't know why they died. They just died. Something wrong with the soil, possibly, or maybe the stuff we got from the nursery wasn't the best. We complained about it. So we got 30 kids there. Each kid had his or her own little tree to plant. And we've got these 30 dead trees. All these kids looking at these little brown sticks. It was depressing. It wouldn't have been so bad, except that a couple of the kids, weeks before the thing with the trees, the snakes all died. But I think that the snakes, well, the reason the snakes kicked off was that, you remember the boiler was shut off for 4 days because of the strike? And that was explicable. It was something you could explain to the kids because of the strike. I mean, none of the parents would let them cross the picket line, and they knew there was a strike going on and what it meant. So when things got started up again, we found the snakes, they weren't too disturbed. With the herb gardens, it was probably a case of overwatering. At least now they know not to overwater. The children were very conscious with the herb garden, the herb garden, and some of them probably, slipped them a little extra water when we weren't looking, or maybe, well, I don't like to think about sabotage, although it did occur to us. I mean, it was something that crossed our minds. We were thinking that probably because that the gerbil, we were thinking that probably because that the gerbils had died, and the white mice had died, and the salamander. Well, now they know not to carry them around in plastic bags. Of course, we expected the tropical fish to die. That was no surprise. Those numbers, you look at them crooked in the belly up. You look at them crooked in their belly up on the surface. But the lesson plan called for tropical fish. At that point, there was nothing we could do. It happens every year. You just have to hurry past it. So this is The School by Donald Bartholomew. I think it is a short story that is really worth a look, is really worth a read. It is masterful. I really like what I've read from Bartholomew. But while I was in Bloom's The Best Poems of the English Language, I happened across, each one of these poets is introduced with a mini biography. And I came across, where is it here? I'm sure this is scintillating to watch, by the way. Let me flip through books. Matthew Arnold, 1822 to 1888. Arnold, long admired for both his poetry and his literary criticism, was not particularly good at either. We get that little bit of witticism and dark humor, scoffing humor perhaps, from Bloom quite often. And it reminds me how much I love Bloom, how much I like him. But it also reminds me that I often look to Bloom for inspiration. And here on page 201, in his mini biography, the opening of his mini biography for John Milton, we get this. No poet since Milton in English approaches his good eminence. Not Blake, Wordsworth, Whitman, Dickinson, Yeats, Stevens, except for Shakespeare. No poet has been so influential. From John Dryden to T.S. Eliot, Milton has been a provocation and a shadow. God damn. How inspiring is that? What would it mean to have someone write something like that about you? I think it... Was it on the... No. So on my personal channel, I'll leave a pinned comment in the comment section to my personal channel. Last week was Elon Musk Day, which is 420, for fairly obvious reasons. But I was talking a little bit about the Annus Mirabilis, a miracle year. For example, Einstein's 1905, and how I look to things like that for inspiration oftentimes. But these little snippets from Bloom on different authors are incredibly inspirational. And I have another book from Bloom, Genius by Harold Bloom. Again, I know that this is a mirror image, but it's just called Genius. A mosaic of 100 exemplary creative minds. This is something that I have not read cover to cover, unfortunately, but I do peruse around it once in a while because, like I say, Bloom on, which is a series that I've started here on Strip Cover Lit, but Bloom on a writer is something that is incredibly inspiring to me oftentimes, because it's a reminder. I don't submit work anymore. I don't even type it up anymore out of my notebooks. That's why the whole bit with Patreon is really stretching me past my level of comfort. But it is seeing Bloom speak about these writers in these ways is really inspiring to me, because it's maybe a healthy reminder that this is not masturbation, that there is something more to this, that perhaps someday there are people on the other side of things, on the receiving end of these words, for all of the crafting that goes behind them. Oftentimes, Hemingway said that there is no person so lonely as the writer but the suicide. It's not an exact quote, but it's something close. And yeah, I think that's true. And I think that holding hands with the writer is the reader. And these are two things to which I have dedicated my life, So there is in Bloom's words on other writers a bit of solace, a bit of recognition, maybe. That is what I'm searching for. A bit of recognition that there is merit, there is worth, there is value, there is sense and sensibility in this practice. And I need that sometimes. It's important to me, I think. I don't really seek or need reassurance. But goddamn, I'm only human, and sometimes it helps. Anyway, on Flannery O'Connor, I was having a discussion with a smart cookie indeed recently about Flannery O'Connor. Where the hell is this? And someone else who is a fan of Flannery O'Connor is Harold Bloom. What am I doing here? No, I'm going the right way. No, I'm not. Going the wrong way entirely. Can't read my own writing. 576, apparently. I would like to read the first paragraph and then the last two paragraphs that old Bloom has in here about Aunt Flan. Like Hemingway, Flannery O'Connor did her best work in the short story. Even a brief list of her masterpieces would include A Good Man is Hard to Find, Good Country People, A View of the Woods, Revelation, Parker's Back, and Judgment Day. But there are another 5 or 6 nearly as extraordinary. I don't even think so. A Good Man is Hard to Find, and oh man, A Good Man is Hard to Find is not my favorite. My favorite is The Life You Save May Be Your Own. But the last two, he goes on to talk about parody. Parody, to work, must understand and know its victims, and O'Connor hardly a saintly temperament, had neither the compassion nor the patience to understand and know Raber. This is not indictment, as it would seem. She had mistaken her ultimate precursor, who was Jonathan Swift and not Nathaniel Hawthorne. And as with West and perhaps Swift, there is sadism in O'Connor's temperament. The young prophet Tarwater baptizes Raber's little idiot son by drowning him, a murder that produces no remorse either in Tarwater or in O'Connor. This Catholic novelist's indubitable genius, her other self, does not seem to me Catholic or even normative Christian. If the Tarwaters are, to Connor, quote unquote, natural Catholics, unquote, then O'Connor, in her parodistic propheticism, is yet another oxymoron, a quote, natural Gnostic, unquote. Grace does not arrive in O'Connor's fictions to correct nature, but rather to abolish it. We would be good people, O'Connor insinuates, if somebody were there to shoot us every moment of our lives, or to drown us in baptizing us. The regeneration through violence is the doctrine of Shrike in Miss Lonely Hearts, and of Judge Holden in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. It is, in my judgment, the true vision of what I have learned to call the American religion, our pragmatic national faith. Her admirers praise Flannery O'Connor as a Roman Catholic moralist. An estimate I find odd. I celebrate her genius as another authentic prophet of the American religion, at once the source of our individuality in literature and in life, and the origin also of our endemic violence, which West parodied, as O'Connor did also, but with a certain ambivalence. I think for me that speaks to the line of where one of my favorite authors, Chuck Palahniuk, Fight Club was great. I really loved Fight Club, and I found Fight Club when I needed Fight Club. After that, his writing turned a bit sadistic, throwing shit in the water just to see the colors, I think. Which is, I think, a little bit of what Harold Bloom is scorning Flannery O'Connor for here. But it makes me want to go back to literary and thematic terms on page 239. Parody. Imitation of a particular style or genre for the purposes of satirizing it, which I don't think is what O'Connor is being chastised for in that bit of writing. It is the characterization of characters with which Harold Bloom draws criticism. And it is the same, I think, for me with Chuck Palahniuk in his turn to sadism. He is not yearning to understand the subjects of his writing, but he is not yearning to understand the subjects of his writing in a far less enterprising fashion than is Flannery O'Connor. The subject of satire may be an author or a distinctive style, such as Ernest Hemingway, or formulaic structure, such as soap opera. Parody is an ancient form. Aristophanes parodied both, and I can never say this, Aeschylus and Euripides in The Frogs. In the late Middle Ages, Rabelais parodied the language of scholasticism. Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey is a parody of the popular Gothic novels of her day. There's a little bit more there, but I'm not really going to go into it because I don't think it's necessary for this conversation. But there is also parody of subject. And I think that is what not only Bloom is getting at with Flannery O'Connor, but also that which I draw exception to with Chuck Palahniuk at times. And it is, again, what I will draw ire towards. So, Adjustment Day. In Adjustment Day by Chuck Palahniuk, not only was it not really all that good, a lot of the parody therein was of people that Chuck didn't really understand, it didn't seem. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am the faulty one there, but it didn't seem so. But talking about parody made me want to recommend another short story. This coming to us again from the Scribner on page 181 from Stuart Dybek. A short story called We Didnt, which is, if I am reading it correctly, and maybe I'm not, a parody sort of romantic stories, a parody of romance in general, a parody of what it means to be in a relationship, all these sorts of things. We didn't in the light. We didn't in the darkness. We didn't in the fresh-cut summer grass or in the mounds of autumn leaves or in the snow where the moonlight threw down our shadows. We didn't in your room on the canopy bed you slept in, the bed you'd slept in as a child, or in the backseat of my father's rusted Rambler, which smelled of the smoked chubs and kielbasa he delivered on weekends from my Uncle Vincent's meat market. We didn't in your mother's Buick 8, where a rosary twined the rearview mirror like a beaded black snake with silver cruciform fangs. At the end of our lover's lane, a side street of abandoned factories, where I perfected the pinch that springs open a brawl behind the lilac bushes in Marquette Park, where you first touched me through my jeans and your nipples, swollen against the transparent cotton, seemed the shade of lilacs. In the balcony of the now-defunct Clark Theater, where I wiped popcorn salt from my palms and slid them up your thighs, and you whispered, I feel like Doris Day is watching us. We didn't. How adept we were at fumbling, how perfectly mistimed our timing, how utterly we confused energy with ecstasy. Remember that night becalmed by heat, and the two of us fused by sweat, trembling as if the wind from outer space, that only we could feel was gusting across Oak Street Beach. Entwined in your faded Navajo blanket, we lay soul-kissing until you wept with wanting. We'd been kissing all day, all summer, kisses tasting of different shades of lip gloss and too many Cokes. The lake had turned hot pink, rose, rapture, pearl, amethyst with dusk, then washed with night black with a ruff of silver foam. Beyond a momentary horizon, silent bolts of heat lightning throbbed, perhaps setting barns on fire somewhere in Indiana. The beach that had been so crowded was deserted, as if there was a curfew. Only the bodies of lovers remained, visible in lightning flashes, scattered like the fallen on a battlefield. A few of them moaning, waiting for the goals to pick them clean. Stuart Dybek's We Didnt. Great short story. This entire collection is definitely worth buying, worth the read. There's so much in here, but I think